It's hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, we were together in the sanctuary of the LJS. So much has changed, and so fast. I've lost my orientation, the usually calm routine that carries me from one Shabbat to the next, preparing for services, visiting the sick, being with mourners, teaching my Kabbalat Torah class, working with our B'nai and Banot mitzvah and our adult education classes. Not seeing you, not being able to sit beside you, to listen or hear your stories, to greet you at Kiddush and learn how you and your families are, that has somehow discombobulated me, and I feel at sea, as no doubt you too are feeling at the moment. We are all struggling to adapt to new and different ways of being and to finding our paths in these unprecedented times. I've had little time to read, to think deeply about what is happening to us and what its effect will be on us when we emerge through the other side of this experience of the coronavirus and lockdown. I am struck, however, by the Torah portion we read this morning, which describes the isolation of the priests, Aaron and his sons, commanded to share a sacrificial meal with each other, and then to practice self-isolation. Lo tetzeu shivat yamim ad yom melot yemei miluechem. You shall not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days, until the day that your period of ordination is complete. Why would they need to self-isolate? In the Bible, isolation is required for women during their monthly period and after childbirth. It's required for people with skin diseases, conditions that were regarded as dangerous and therefore requiring distance from the sanctuary for set periods of time. For the priests, the opposite seems to be true. They are to avoid leaving the tabernacle in case they come into contact with any form of impurity. So many of us self-isolating have been fearful of contracting this virus, hidden and unseen, capable, as we've seen, of attacking fatally, and against which we have no inoculation, no means of combating it. This plague in our own time takes us back to the archetype of the biblical plagues, the pestilence, the darkness, the death of the firstborn. What is it that we must endure to remove the plague of our own time and experience liberation? The paradigm of the biblical plagues is difficult. Pharaoh's hard-heartedness, the punishments inflicted by God on the Egyptians, the escape of the Israelites from each one of the 10 plagues. It's not a theology I readily embrace, although I think we can acknowledge that when there are forces beyond our control, when there are things that get in the way of our everyday operating values, then some kind of reorientation of our beliefs and principles takes place. I want to share with you a story which I came across this week. It's a Slavonic story, originally told in the Polish language, and it's called The Peasant and the Plague. And it's a fable I think offers some insight into our own time. Here's how it goes. A peasant sat down in the shade of a large tree to rest. The sun was high and glowing. Suddenly he perceived something approaching him from a distance. As it came nearer, he saw it was a woman wrapped in a large cloak, and her legs were of a wonderful length. The peasant was greatly frightened and tried hard to run away, but the spectre seized him with her bony arms and said, "Do you know the plague? It is I. Take me on your shoulders and carry me over the whole country. You must not miss a town or village, or even a hamlet. I must be carried everywhere. For yourself, be not afraid. In the midst of death and misery, you shall remain alive and well." She put her long arms around his neck. The peasant started, but was surprised at feeling no weight. He turned his head and then saw the spectre was sitting on his shoulders. He took her first to a town. There was music and dancing in the taverns, and joy in every place. Mirth and pleasure held their sway. When the peasant entered into the marketplace, the woman shook her pestilential garments. Soon the music and dancing ceased, joy disappeared, and a terror reigned supreme. The terrified peasant saw coffins and dead bodies on every side. He heard the funeral bells everywhere. Soon the cemetery was filled, and there was no more room to bury the dead. On went the miserable peasant. In every village, every house was left empty. Inhabitants, pale and trembling, fled. People were dying on the roads, in the woods, and in the fields. The peasant's native village stood on a high hill. There lived his wife, his little children, and his aged parents. At the sight of it, his heart bled within him. Seizing the spectre with all his strength, lest she should escape, he hurried past his home. Before him flowed the river with its blue waters. On the other side were dark green hills, and far beyond, mountains capped with snow lost their summits in the clouds. His resolution was quickly taken. He rushed on and plunged headlong into the river, hoping by meeting death himself to drown the plague as well, and thus also to save the country from further desolation. The unhappy peasant perished in the waters, but the plague as a spirit could not be drowned. Overcome, however, by his courageous act, she fled away in terror and hid herself among the mountains. Thus the peasant not only saved his village and all those who were dear to him, but also that part of his native land into which the plague had not been carried. What meaning can this fable have for us in our own circumstances? Perhaps it offers an image of the silent carrier of the disease. The peasant carries the plague through villages where he doesn't know the inhabitants, and where the spectre shakes her pestilential garments on unknown villagers and townspeople. But when he reaches his own native country, he avoids his own family and community. He keeps apart from them to save their lives, although he himself perishes. But this spectre, personified mysteriously as female, tells us something as well about the deepest nature of the peasant and what it is he is haunted by. He takes his deepest fears and anxieties to other people and fills them with foreboding and despair. His presence destroys mirth and happiness. It silences singing and dancing. Only when he comes near to his family does he realize the need to protect them from his own deep-rooted fears. He has to find a way to douse the terror and return it to the unconscious. The pestilence in this dream narrative is the spirit of our terror. It's our stress and anxiety of living through these times. In the dream, his plunging into the waters of the river does not mean death, but the submerging of the spectre into the waters of the unconscious self with an act of self-sacrificing courage and resilience. And so the peasant is freed from his terrors and anxieties. They disappear into the mountains, and he can be assured that he will not communicate his own fears and foreboding to those who are most dear to him. This plague of the coronavirus is one of the most significant and devastating events of our own times. Like the spectre that wraps itself around the peasant, the fears and sense of foreboding it evokes cling to us. It saps our wisdom, our resilience, and strength. But we need not be colonized by this plague completely. There is another response. It is George Eliot, quoted in the Meditations before Kaddish in our Siddur, who acknowledges that the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been, is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. The life of this plague will pale into insignificance compared to our own individual lives. It is in our individual lives that the great transformations take place. And in the words of Jung, the whole future, the whole history of the world, ultimately springs as a gigantic summation from these hidden sources in individuals. What wisdom and resilience can we bring to these times through which we are living? What small steps and actions can we contribute for ourselves and for others, not only now and in the next few months, but beyond into the new world that we will be responsible for creating? May we calm our own sense of foreboding and fear as we move into another week and find inspiration in our faith, in our families and community, in our unhistoric acts, and in the peacefulness of this Shabbat, which brings tranquility and rest to our troubled spirits. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.